Have you ever been alone in a place that should be crowded? Now imagine, you're not really alone. Something is there, watching, waiting. This is the story of a young woman who took the last train of the night and discovered that some journeys are one way. Get ready for a ride filled with suspense, terror, and mysteries that will make you wonder, what would you do if you were the last person on the subway? Don't miss a single detail, because this story will leave you breathless until the very end. The last person on the subway. The subway wasn't empty. Though it seemed deserted, there was something beyond the echo of wheels on tracks and flickering lights. Something that shouldn't be there. She couldn't explain it, but with each passing station, the presence became more palpable. Her senses screamed, but she remained seated, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely hold her phone. "I'm almost there," she typed, but the message didn't send. The signal was gone, and with it, any sense of safety. An inexplicable cold filled the train car. Suddenly, the lights flickered, revealing a figure at the far end of the car for a split second. Tall, thin, its contours were wrong, as if it didn't belong to this world. When the lights stabilized, she looked again. Nothing, just my imagination, she murmured to herself, but the train jerked to a halt before she could finish the thought. The doors remained closed, and the station outside didn't exist on the map. She stood up, her heart racing, staring into the darkness outside. That's when she heard it. A faint, repetitive sound, like nails scratching metal. Before she could react, the train's intercom crackled, emitting a voice that didn't sound human. Cold, distorted, it said, "Next stop, last station." She felt the air leave her lungs. The last station didn't exist? At least it shouldn't. She turned, trying to find any sign of life in the car, but then she noticed the reflection in the window showed something standing beside her, something that wasn't there. She turned quickly, but all she found was an empty seat and the growing sound of the train accelerating into the shadows. The subway was the heart of the city, pulsing day and night, connecting lives in a web of underground routes. But at this late hour, it felt more like a forgotten vein, draining the remnants of energy from a sleeping city. The tunnel walls were marked by faded graffiti and old water stains, like scars on an organism that had seen better days. The smell of grease, rust, and something subtler, a mix of mold and despair, permeated the air. She was a 24-year-old architecture student who often worked late at an underpaid internship in the city center. Her brown hair was tied in a messy bun, and her light brown eyes showed signs of exhaustion. Tonight, all she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and forget the exhausting day. The car she was in was old, one of the few that hadn't been renovated. The seats were covered in worn leather, torn in some places, and the floor showed marks of accumulated dirt that no cleaner could remove. The lighting flickered annoyingly, creating shadows that seemed to dance on the reflective surfaces. There was no one else there, or at least that's what she believed. As the train sped through the tunnels, she tried to distract herself by observing the surroundings. Each passing station was a vision of abandonment. Broken lights, trash piled in corners, and empty benches waiting for passengers who would never arrive. She thought about how the scene looked almost post-apocalyptic, as if she were the last survivor of an invisible disaster. At one point, she remembered her best friend Clara's warning. Never take the last train. Strange things happen. She laughed to herself, trying to shake off the growing discomfort. It was just an urban legend, something people made up to scare others. But still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The silence was broken by the sharp sound of a message arriving. She looked at her phone and noticed the battery was about to die. The message was from an unknown number. "You shouldn't be here." She frowned, trying to make sense of it. Probably a prank, she thought, though the message felt too alarming to ignore. As she read it, she noticed that her reflection in the train window didn't match her movements. When she raised her hand to push back a strand of hair, the reflection remained still, its eyes fixed on her. She froze, her heart racing, unable to move or look away. When she finally gathered the courage to turn around, there was nothing. But something felt different. The air was colder, and the sound of the train was now accompanied by a faint, constant whisper. Her breathing quickened as she tried to rationalize what she had just seen. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe fear amplifying her imagination. But the faint whisper continued, no longer faint, no longer distant. It was as if the sound was alive, pulsating through the walls of the car. She walked slowly to the end of the car, her boots echoing on the metal floor. Each step seemed to increase the weight in her chest. She tried to look forward, but the feeling of being watched came from all directions. She knew that if she looked back, she'd see nothing. And that was the worst part. "Don't pay attention," she thought, repeating the phrase like a mantra. Reaching the end of the car, she found a locked door that should lead to the next car. But the round window in the door didn't show another car, only darkness. She tried the latch, but it was stuck. A new message buzzed on her phone, which now showed only 2% battery. The message said, "You need to get off before the train stops." Get off? How? She asked aloud, the sound of her own voice echoing in the empty space. The train was moving. There was no way to get off. And where would she go? Still, the message sparked a flicker of desperation in her chest. She returned to her seat and looked around, searching for something, anything that could give her a clue about what to do. The lights flickered again, and this time there was no doubt. The figure was there. At the far end of the car, almost imperceptible in the dim light, but unmistakable. Tall, thin, the contours of its body still wrong, as if it didn't follow the rules of human anatomy. She blinked, and the figure seemed to take a step forward without actually moving, as if it were closer each time she looked. "Stop it! You're not real," she shouted, but the figure didn't hesitate. The whisper grew louder, like a distorted chorus of overlapping voices, and she felt panic take over. The air in the car seemed to grow denser, making it harder to breathe. As the train continued speeding into the unknown, she gripped her phone tightly, her eyes glued to the darkened screen, and tried to call someone, anyone. But, as expected, the signal was dead, and the battery gave its last gasp. The device shut down, leaving her even more isolated in this surreal situation. Then something changed. The train began to slow, but not smoothly. It was as if the brakes were fighting against a greater force. The metallic sound of the tracks was deafening, and she clung to the seat to keep from falling. The lights flickered erratically, and for a moment the car was completely dark. When the lights returned, she realized she was no longer alone. Seated in alternating rows, indistinct figures occupied the seats. None of them moved, but all were facing her. Their faces were blank, as if they had no features, just smooth, opaque surfaces. At that moment, she understood that she could no longer ignore what was happening. This was no ordinary subway car. It was something far beyond human comprehension. The train stopped suddenly, but the doors didn't open. The sound of an alarm echoed through the car, mingling with the whisper that now seemed like a distant scream. She watched in despair as the faceless figures slowly stood, their movements synchronized and unnatural. Their bodies elongated grotesquely, each joint cracking like old wood. She tried to back away, but she was surrounded. Each step back brought her closer to the end of the car, where the window showed only the void of the tunnel. Then the flickering lights revealed something even worse. A massive shadow moving on the ceiling like a predator about to strike. Its eyes glowed red, fixed on her. The figures began to whisper in unison, forming words she couldn't understand, but that made her heart race even faster. The shadow on the ceiling advanced, and in desperation she screamed, "What do you want from me?" The whispering stopped. An absolute silence filled the car, so deep she could hear her own ragged breathing. Then a voice, deep and guttural, responded, "You made the wrong choice. Now, you belong to us." Before she could react, the figures closed in, and the shadow descended like a wave of darkness, swallowing everything around her. She felt her body being pulled in an impossible direction, as if she were being dragged out of reality. Everything turned cold, and then silence. The train resumed its journey, now empty except for the shadows inhabiting its corners. On the seat where she had been sitting, only her phone remained, blinking with a final message. "Welcome to the last station." When she disappeared, the train continued as if nothing had happened. The darkness in the tunnel seemed denser, and the silence was broken only by the monotonous sound of wheels sliding on the tracks. It was empty, but the feeling of something present, something watching, still lingered. The car emerged into a station that didn't appear on any map or memory of subway passengers. It was a completely desolate place, where the walls were covered in ancient inscriptions, symbols that seemed to pulse with an unknown energy. There was a clock on the wall, but its hands spun backward, while the light in the environment shifted between shades of gray and deep red. The doors opened slowly, as if inviting a new passenger to enter. Silence reigned, but there was something in the air, a presence, a distant murmur. And then, suddenly, a figure entered the station. It was a man in a suit, carrying a worn briefcase and a lost look. He seemed unaware of the surroundings, as if drawn to the train by an invisible force. He boarded the car and sat in the same seat she had occupied moments before. The train began to move again, and the man seemed oblivious to the fact that he had boarded a train with no destination, in a place that didn't exist. He opened the briefcase, and inside was a single ticket. Handwritten in red ink, it read, "Welcome to the last station." As the train plunged back into darkness, the sound of whispers returned, growing slowly. In the reflection of the window, the man was no longer alone. Shadows moved behind him, whispering in voices that echoed for eternity. Outside, in the world above, the city continued its frenetic pace, unaware that, underground, the train carried stories of people who would never be seen again. The legend of the last train gained a new chapter, and a new soul was added to what now seemed like an endless cycle. But in the silence of the car, as the shadows danced and the clock ticked backward, a new message appeared in the reflection of the window. It said, "Will you be next?" Stories like this make you wonder, what's really hiding in the places we pass through every day? If this tale sent chills down your spine, you won't want to miss what's coming next. We'll dive deeper into urban mysteries that will make you think twice before stepping into a subway, an elevator, or even your own home. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter. After all, you never know when you might find yourself on a journey with no return.